Only passed the short-term spending bill because of Democrats yet again. 38 House Republicans defied both Johnson and Trump, refusing to pass their version of the deal that would have also raised the debt limit. When the next Congress is sworn in, Johnson must be reelected as Speaker. And it won't be easy. Already, two Republicans, Paul Gosar and Thomas Massie, have said they won't back him. Another, Marjorie Taylor Greene, floated the idea of picking a new leader. Her suggestion? Elon Musk. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman of Illinois, Sean Casten. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Congressman. Nice to see you. I am wondering, you all had a caucus meeting yesterday at 5 p.m. I know, because I was going into a hit, and I'm like calling all these Democratic members of Congress, and they're all like, we're going into our caucus meeting now to decide what you're going to do about this bill. But I also have to imagine you discussed Speaker Johnson as well. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said earlier this week that Democrats would not vote to bail out Johnson in a speaker battle. Is that something that you all discussed, and is that posture you believe going to hold in this coming out of Christmas break next year?
So we definitely did not discuss that last night. I mean, bear in mind that we had bill text dropped about maybe 10 minutes before we went into that meeting, and all of us were trying to understand what was in the bill text. So that was very much a substantive policy meeting and figuring out what to do next. As to Johnson, it's tragic but appropriate that this term has ended with the same dysfunction the Republicans started it. We started the term with McCarthy, Santos, Gates, fistfights on the floor, 15 votes. We ended the term without McCarthy, Santos, or Gates, but a Republican Party that is just still sort of at war with itself. It's pretty clear, based on last night's vote, that there's a significant block of Republicans who don't like Johnson. And I think Johnson has stepped into the same mistake that McCarthy made, that yes, we are partisans, we have our different policy agendas, but as Richie Neal had pointed out, trust is your currency. And when Johnson agreed to a deal with Democrats and then walked away from it, it reminded, I think, a lot of us of when McCarthy had agreed to us on a deal with the Limit Save Grow Act to not blow up the debt ceiling, and then spent the weekend bashing us all on television. And that blew up any chance of Democratic support when the motion to vacate came that next day.
The minority leader was out yesterday sort of framing Democrats thinking about this, talking about the billionaire boys club that Democrats are up against. Take a listen to what he had to say.
House Democrats have successfully stopped extreme MAGA Republicans from shutting down the government, crashing the economy, and hurting working class Americans all across the land. House Democrats have successfully stopped the Billionaire Boys Club, which wanted a $4 trillion blank check, by suspending the debt ceiling.
Two questions for you, Congressman. One, how were Democrats able to borrow language from Simone, stay in array? And two, how are you going to message this to your constituents, the stakes of this spending bill?
Well, look, the Democrats did what we did all term, right? I mean, name a bill. I think Melanie referred to this in your last segment. Name a bill that passed this term and got to the president's desk that didn't pass with overwhelming Democratic support, and in most cases, a minority of Republicans. We're here to do the work. We're not here just to win elections. You win elections so that you can do the work, and I think we'll continue to do that. As it goes forward, I think if this bill had been the first offer and only offer, we probably would have been pretty happy with it. We got the farm bill that President Biden was asking for. We continued to fund governments at levels that were set by Democrats in the last Congress and then, slightly modified by President Biden. But we've never had a Republican funding bill this cycle that wasn't dominated by Democratic votes. Leader Jeffries was referring to was this effort by Trump to get rid of the debt ceiling that would have allowed him to pass massive tax cuts that would have blown up the deficits and taken off any checks. And I've been very outspoken. I think the debt ceiling is a silly artifact, but we can't give them that kind of blank check. And so we did succeed in taking that away. The one concern that I think a lot of us still have is that Trump didn't get what he wanted, but Musk did get what he wanted. In the first version of this bill, we had a provision, Republican-led provision, to put limitations on outbound investment in China. Musk pushed really hard, and the Republicans took that out. And look, if you're worth $400 billion, you've probably got conflicts of interest all over the place. But Musk has a lot of money flowing into China. And I don't want this to be partisan, but I don't think we should be voting to prop up billionaires so that we can send, potentially, military or technological secrets to our adversaries. And yet the Republican caucus caved to Musk on that issue, even as we were able to get them not to cave to Trump on the debt ceiling question. So we've won the battle, but there's many more ahead.
Congressman, get used to, the whole Musk influence on the House of Representatives. I want to play for you the response of the Speaker when asked whether or not he wanted to be Speaker again.
Do you still want to be Speaker after this experience?
Look, being Speaker of the House is a challenge in this modern era, but it's a challenge that we accept. It's a great honor to serve in the position. I wouldn't say it's the most fun job in the world all the time, but it's an important one.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge in the modern era. Nancy Pelosi seemed to have navigated it pretty easily, much easier than the Republican speakers have. My question isn't so much about Johnson. I just wanted to set that as a framing for the question, and that is, how do Democrats decide their political moves here in terms of when to lean in and help and when not to? It's a fine line, I would think, given how disarrayed and disorganized the House leadership is, the control that Musk will have over both the leadership and the members, Donald Trump weighing in and out. A speaker clearly, if he holds on, will be even weaker than he is now, not stronger, believe it or not. And so how do you, as Democrats, look at this opposition and figure how you either support them or just let them dry rot in the sun, in the heat of politics?
Obviously it's going to depend on the situation, but I think one of the challenges that Republicans have that the Democrats don't is that the Republicans disagree on goals. The Democrats within our caucus, we sometimes disagree on paths, right? But the policy goals that we're pushing for as Democrats, that government should work for all the people, that we should have, a robust growing middle class, that, we should live up to our foundational promises of equal treatment under the law, that we don't think people accused of rape and 34 felonies should be in positions of power. We have differences of opinion about how to make that happen, but there's a shared set of values. And, whether it was Speaker Pelosi or Leader Jeffries, I think they've been very good at consistently reminding us that we can disagree on paths while never losing our sight on goals. I think on the Republican side, they have this separate challenge that they have a very sizable wing of their party that is opposed to the idea of governance. They don't want government to work. They're out there saying a shutdown would be good. They've been completely corrupted by this view that, what's the line that you want to be able to drown government, shrink government so you can drown it in a bathtub. That wing sits uneasily with the old, George H.W. Bush, Mitt Romney, Ronald Reagan Republicans, who were certainly very culturally conservative, but set out that government should do things. And those two factions between them are I think, are better seen as two parties who are caucusing together, but really don't like each other. Remember, we've had 2 fistfights in the House this term. They all involved Republicans.
Well.
So the government funding debacle has reinforced once again the importance of who controls the House. Democrats fell short of taking back the chamber in 24 by just a few races, and they're already, and this is good for them to know, working to make sure they don't miss their chance in 26. Now, House Majority PAC, an independent group closely aligned with Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, just launched a new effort to recruit Democratic challengers for Republican-held congressional districts in states like Arizona, Michigan, California, and Virginia.
that were not contested this year. The fund will pay for an extensive effort to find attractive candidates across the country, with an emphasis on people who may not already be in elected politics, but have excelled in their chosen fields. And joining us now to unpack all of this and get into it is the president of House Majority PAC, Mike Smith. Welcome to the table.
You know, I'm glad Mike came in the studio to tell us about what's going on.
I know, this is interesting.
Out on the road.
I'm on the road.
Raising the dollars.
Reminds me of old school when I was back in chairman, having that kind of view of the world.
Having to go out there. Okay, but Mike, talk about these recruitment efforts.
Yeah.
Why people in these unlikely chosen fields? So what I'm hearing is not people who maybe have run for office before, maybe business owners. Why?
Mm-hmm. So I'd say, in 2024, over 148 million votes were cast. 7,300 votes determined who had control of the House of Representatives. That's it. 7,300 out of 148 million. So
wait, what?
7,300 votes across 3 districts. So the through line for whether we won or lost most of those districts related to the quality of the candidate running. And we know 26 is going to be ground zero for the House of Representatives. The only way to keep a check on Donald Trump, make sure Republicans can enact some of these extreme policies, is if we elect a Democratic majority and elect Hakeem Jeffries as the next speaker. And we've already seen this week how crazy it's been, whether it's threatening to defund childhood cancer research, 4 days before Christmas, threatening to withhold paychecks to our military service members. So we're trying to go deeper into the map, basically saying we're going to be there if we have candidates, strong candidates, in these in districts that are going to be ultra competitive, whether it's Mike Lawler in New York, Juan Ciscomani in Arizona, but also deeper into Republican territory in Florida, in California, and other places. And I think, to your point, recognizing that we can't use the same playbook if we want to win. So you look at Janelle Stelson in Pennsylvania. It was a district that we didn't think was going to be incredibly competitive. She had an unusual background. She was a Republican, switched to become a Democrat, local news broadcaster. She put that district in play and came within 1.2 points of winning in a very tough environment. So I think we're trying to go deeper into the map to figure out who we can get to run in these races and how we can be supportive of those people.
So I think that's smart. It's a lot of what I did in the 2009, 2010 cycle. Winning state legislative races, winning down ballot races, which actually, as I keep trying to remind people, creates energy for top of the ticket races for federal office, for example, or even statewide for governor. But of course, Republicans are not without their sass about your efforts. And so it was interesting from Axios reporting several House Republicans who won by comfortable margins scoffed at being included on the HMP's hit list, I guess. In their defense, I would say hit list, but in their defense, I only won by 25 points. So I guess it's razor thin, quipped Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas. Representative Carlos Jimenez of Florida told Axios that being on the HMP list will make me work harder, saying it's unrealistic that Democrats could win his seat, but they could dream. I know a lot of that cockiness back in the day. People, Democrats who thought they had the seat because the district was made for me, and then their behind was sent home. That's the opportunity. You see something that these members don't see even in their own districts, right?
Yeah, I think to your point, take those seats for granted. They should take their seats for granted. You look at a couple of different things. One, 2018, not to say this is going to be the same election cycle, but in 2018, at the beginning of the election cycle, the Cook Political Report, the nonpartisan race raters, said there was maybe 13 races that Republicans had that were going to be ultra competitive. Before the election, they said there was over 70. There are races right now that people don't think are going to be competitive that we're trying to put into play now. And that's why we laid a marker down earlier than we've ever done it before to basically say, raise your hand. We're going to be out there in the states talking to you, trying to figure out how do we build a robust campaign. And if we can make it real, we're going to be there and invest in that races.
The other part of this, Simone, is that I find interesting, and this is one of the things that I think the Democrats should keep an eye on, is that you're already beginning to see emerge within the Republican Party 2 camps. There's the hardcore MAGA, I'm Trump, yeah, baby, I'm Trump, get the hat. I got the hat, right? But there's now emerging Musk Republicans.
Yes.
I find that to be interesting. It'll be very curious to see how that plays out in the types of candidates Republicans have emerging in primaries competing against each other for those seats that the Democrats are looking at.
That the Democrats are targeting. And I mean, can we put I'm going to call it a hit list. I'm sorry, but I like that. It's the HMP list, but it's a hit list. I like the hit list. Can we put the hit list up on the screen, please, E84? These are the districts to watch first.
I see some vulnerables
these are Republican districts to watch that you all are saying, we think. Look at Nancy Mace on that list, South Carolina 1. And then the next list is the targeted districts list. So these are the folks that you all are saying, like, these are the targeted districts. These are the potential open seat, John James, Michigan 10. These are Mike Lawler. Can we talk about Mike Lawler for a second? He may run for governor. He said he wants to be governor potentially of New York. But he also has been on TV in this last debacle talking about the money for veterans who were affected by 9/11 that was in the bill. He was very dismissive of it, and I'm like, not the man that want to be governor of New York, not the man that sits in a seat that is not reliably red nor blue but truly purple. Yep. These are the kind of members that you're talking about.
These are the races that we're hyper-focused on. And I think, look at the past week. You know, we haven't even sworn in the new Congress at this point yet. Look how dysfunctional it is. Look how chaotic it is. I would imagine if I'm a Republican sitting in a ultra-competitive seat, I'm probably looking for an exit at this point. Because why do you want to do this for another 2 years? You know, you're not going to win. I think Democrats are taking back the majority. So you're going to basically have to deal with Donald Trump tweeting at you. You're going to have to deal with Elon Musk tweeting at you and recruiting candidates against you, most likely. What's the point of doing it? So I think our big effort is we're putting them on notice now, especially in the places where we think they're going to run for other office. And that's Juan Ciscomani, that's John James, that's Mike Lawler. But going deep, and I think over the next few weeks, you're going to see a robust accountability effort focused on some of the votes they've already taken, some of the things they've said, whether it's cutting Social Security and Medicare, again, withholding veterans' paychecks or military service member paychecks 4 days before Christmas, but really putting them on notice early on and significantly and then continuously through Election Day.
I would note it is proverbially criminal because you got to be specific around here nowadays.
You do, yes. You got to be specific because you get phone calls if you're not. Or at least an email. The thing that I just want to put in front of you, so you'll have some opportunities potentially, you know, if Donald Trump continues to pluck folks from the House to put outside in other parts of the government. So those seats will be in play. But is the strategy, or should the strategy also be about not just winning the House, but winning the House? Yeah. I got 63 seats, baby. There's your number, right?
Michael, 63 seats?
That's what I got.
You got 63 seats?
He got 63 seats.
I got 63 seats, so don't tell me it can't be done, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So my point is, you've got to, in this next cycle, not just win the House, but overwhelm the House. You will not be able to set up opposition if you are a 4-seat majority. You will not be able to set up opposition, I think, appropriately with a 10-seat majority because you're going to have members in some districts in the next presidential cycle worried about the seats. You need to create cushion. What's your thinking and strategy as you put up these wonderful lists?
Put the hit list up.
Yeah, put the list back up, the hit list back up. What is the strategy to maximize those seats?
Yeah, well, I say two things. I think when we had Democratic control of Washington, we had a 5-seat majority in the House, we had a slim majority in the Senate, and we had President Biden as President of the United States, and we were able to accomplish a significant amount of things, probably one of the most significant presidencies in history. And we did that with a 5-seat majority in the House, and that's because Democrats have continued to be united over and over again. We saw that just now, saving the government from closing. So I think our focus, you know, our number one goal is electing Hakeem Jeffries as the next Speaker of the House. We have to have a Democratic majority. We have to have a check on Donald Trump. I think with that, we announced this list, and it's a broad list, and it goes deeper into Republican territory, because our theory of the case is if we can find quality candidates that have an authentic message to tell, and we can supply resources to help get that message out, we can win those seats. Right. So whether that's a 5-seat majority, a 10-seat majority, we care about one thing, and that's making sure that Hakeem Jeffries is the next Speaker of the House.
Mike said they're going to take a majority, however.
That's what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, you just don't want a Manchin problem. That's all I'm saying.
Well, in the House, I know.
Right? So that's all I'm saying. You know, Senator Manchin tied up the Senate for Democrats for 18 months, talking about filibuster, and people in the country were saying, who the hell is Phil and Buster? Anyway,
Liz Cheney was a prominent Republican congresswoman representing Wyoming. She held one of the top positions in the House Republican leadership. She's staunchly conservative. She's the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. But Liz Cheney was one of the few Republicans who refused to fall in line when Donald Trump and his supporters baselessly claimed that there was widespread fraud during the 2020 election. After the January 6th attack on the Capitol in 2021, Liz Cheney became the vice chair of the January 6th Select Committee investigation. She played a key role in presenting evidence against Trump and zeroing in on his role in the effort to overturn the 2020 election results. She was one of only 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump that time around. Liz Cheney maintained her principles rather than folding in fealty to Trump, and the backlash was swift. In May of 2021, House Republicans voted to remove her from leadership in the House, citing her criticism of Trump. Months later, she faced a primary challenge from a Trump-endorsed candidate. According to reporting by Politico, it was carefully orchestrated. Quote, Harriet Hageman ran with Trump's support, was advised by Trump's lieutenants, and was funded by his donors. Trump's aides vetted and interviewed Cheney's prospective challengers with a degree of care that the operation didn't display in other big midterm races. Once they settled on their pick, they cleared the field of Hageman's primary rivals. Then the team formed an outside group that was heavily funded by Trump's PAC, which ran TV ads starring the former president's son, Donald Trump Jr. Cheney lost by more than 30 points. In the years since, Cheney has held her line, continuing to be a vocal critic of Donald Trump and his MAGA party. Trump has called for her to be investigated, jailed, and he's even suggested Cheney should see how it feels to, quote, have guns trained on her face, end quote. This week, House Republicans released a report calling on the FBI to investigate Cheney for her involvement in the January 6th congressional investigation, baselessly claiming that she tampered with a witness. Now, this report does not have any immediate legal consequences. Any investigation of Cheney by the FBI would need to be opened by the Justice Department. But on Wednesday, Trump himself posted online that, quote, Liz Cheney could be in a lot of trouble, end quote. And with Kash Patel, author of the infamous enemies list, potentially at the helm of the FBI, an investigation of Cheney is not out of the question. This is just one example on a growing list of signs that the kinds of revenge politics that we could see in this new Trump term. Trump's promise of retribution, his promise to fire civil service employees en masse, his nomination of a cabinet whose common denominator seems to be blind loyalty. All of this can create a culture of fear and intimidation and pressure to fall in line. And the press, which is called upon to bear witness to all of this and hold power to account, has also become subject to it. Trump has repeatedly labeled the media the enemy of the people. He has suggested both directly and indirectly the use of violence against members of the press. A few days before the election, Trump said he wouldn't mind if an assassin shot through, quote, the fake news, end quote, that was standing in front of him. Trump has repeatedly revoked press credentials from journalists who ask challenging or adversarial questions. During his time in office, Trump blacklisted major outlets like the New York Times and CNN, refusing them access to some press briefings. And in recent months, he suggested that entire broadcast media companies like ABC, CBS, and NBC News lose their broadcasting licenses altogether. Broadcasting licenses are mandated and regulated by the federal government. Maria Ressa is an award-winning journalist born in the Philippines. She fearlessly reported on corruption and human rights abuses within the Filipino government. Her reporting resulted in her arrest and conviction in Manila. In 2021, Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to safeguard the freedom of expression. Maria, good to have you here. Kind of amazing that in all the time we've known each other, how central you are to this particular discussion, because you have seen and been victim to exactly the kinds of things we may actually see here in the United States in the coming years.
Aren't you already seeing it? I mean, just listening to that kind of vindictiveness. We saw this here in the 6 years of Rodrigo Duterte's presidency. And of course, what you said about the attacks on the media, again, it's not as if it's new. You're seeing this now. So I think the question really is, how prepared is the American media for what will happen next?
Well, let's discuss the intersection between the pressure and intimidation against opposition forces like Liz Cheney. I remind everybody, Liz Cheney is still a conservative Republican. But the pressure on people like that or perceived enemies and journalists and the role we have to play and the pressure on journalism. Where's the intersection of all these things? How prepared should we be to fight back?
It's in the Constitution. You know, the Philippine Constitution is patterned after the U.S. Constitution. It's about checks and balances. In the old days, we all used to cheer for each other in checks and balances. There was a set of professional ways to curb power and to voluntarily do so. In these new days, that's all out, that's thrown out. I think the best thing that we had learned in the Philippines is that when there is such a vindictive leader that goes after, look how long it took you to tell the context for Liz Cheney and why she was targeted. It means journalists have to actually give more context, have to give the whole story. And it isn't the tip of the iceberg anymore. You're going to have to go down. But the flip side of that is, you know, where is the line? And this was thrown at us. Where's the line between journalism and activism, right? So you're talking about the politicians. The Republican Party has got to hold the line. In order to keep the lines of the Constitution in place, they can't just blindly follow what President Trump, what he wants when he takes office. And yet that's what we've seen in the past. That's what we saw here with Rodrigo Duterte. Within 6 months of his taking office, the three branches of government essentially buckled. Our institutions crumbled, and we had tens of thousands of people killed under the 6 years Duterte was in power.
Let's talk about the types of pressure that are brought to bear on journalists, because, again, you're an example of this. It's not always the obvious thing, right, where the government comes and just arrests you. It's tax stuff, it's audits, it's intimidation, it's third-party intimidation sometimes. How do you stand up to this? And I ask you very specifically because you're someone who's faced it. So what happens to us when we start to face threats, intimidation, suddenly letters start showing up from the government about checking your bank accounts and things like that?
I think you have to imagine and be prepared for worst case scenarios. We always used to say, whatever it is you're most afraid of, you have to embrace your fear. I never thought I would be arrested. I always thought that, no, these are just threats. It's the same thing that I hear American pundits saying now, he really won't go that far. The Constitution is there. Well, in my case, the minute I got arrested in a strange way showed me that we were living in a different world. What are the things you have to be prepared for? Well, legal cases, the bending of the law. When you bend the law to the point that it breaks, what do you do when that happens? How do you talk to your people? Each news organization, right? Because you have to have a battle plan going in, and you have to let your reporters who are on the ground all the way up to the president of the company. I think the very first step is, and Tim Snyder said this, don't obey prematurely. I don't know I can't remember his exact quote, but in our case, we said
in advance, he says, yeah.
Don't obey in advance. And we're already seeing signs of that. And part of that is because we're all businesses. News organizations are also businesses. We try to cleave away the business. In a newspaper, you would have a publisher, and then you would have the executive, the editor-in-chief. But in today's world, the reason why we had 5 tax evasion charges thrown against us, the attack was on the business. So how do you deal with it? You have to be prepared with that. So it's a lot of communications, but a lot of planning. And in our case, we drilled scenarios.
One of the things that's developing in America, and I would love to know how this works in the Philippines, is there are sort of public, sort of civil society groups who are coming together to say, we will stand in defense of those, not necessarily journalists, because we've got companies and lawyers and things like that, but of those people who are targeted, those opposition leaders, those people who are investigated who may need legal help. Tell me the role that civil society can play in saying we can help hold the line on democracy by saying, if they go after you, we'll stand with you.
That's what makes the democracy. And I don't think we would have survived the time of President Duterte without our community backing us, right? The chilling effect will push everyone down. There's this saying in Japan, in Indonesia, the nail that stands up gets the hammer. But in our case, it was really making an example of specific people. It was the business community, the the politician. We had a Senator Lila de Lima who was in jail for almost 7 years, and she's been cleared of all the charges now, right? But the third, of course, is journalists. So of those three things, I think you can draw the line, right? First, in terms of the politicians themselves, the people who we have elected, you have elected, will the Republican Party act like checks and balances? What will the Democratic Party do? The politicians, legislators have to have courage to stand up. But the second part of that, when the journalists are under attack, will the journalists come together? Mm-hmm. Will they, if someone in the White House, and this happened where someone was thrown out and the White House, the journalists there decided not to follow, right? Yep. And your question about civil society, the line between journalists and activism, journalism and activism is called citizenship, right? If civil society don't switch to this age where we're living in an age of lies, where the world is upside down, the incentive structure of our information ecosystem rewards the lies, rewards the fear, anger, and hate. If people, the citizens of a democracy, don't stand up and demand better, don't move into the physical world, then all of it gets systematically worse. We would not have survived without our community. And that's both domestically here in the Philippines and in the United States, all around the world. The U.S. is the world is watching the United States and what will happen next, because as you know this, Ali, it's a world on fire. I mean, we're walking to the end of 2024 with in a world that in the almost 40 years I've been a journalist, it's never been this bad, with open war, with insidious manipulation at the cellular level. Every person is called now to actually stand up. That's right. And I think that's part of where we need to go.
That's right. We're all. If we want to hold the line, it's going to take all of us. Maria, thanks. It's going to take all of us in America and you and people like you around the world. So thank you so much.
And joining me now for more is Congressman Brendan Boyle, a ranking member of the House Budget Committee. Congressman, you've had your hands full. Ultimately, though, all of the House Democrats voted in favor of the final spending deal. But I got to ask, because this is a perennial evergreen question, why does America always end up having to look to the Democrats to be the adults in the room to save the government's funding?
Yeah, that certainly is an evergreen question. And, you know, we're closing out what is statistically the least productive session of Congress in at least a century. It's a session of Congress that began when the Republicans took 4 days and 15 votes just to elect their own leader at the time, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker. And I think we should have learned then that was going to be a real sign of what this Congress was going to be like. And unfortunately, I don't see any signs for it getting better starting in January 3rd, because unfortunately, Republicans still have a very narrow control. We know it will not improve and actually get to a normal functioning place until Democrats take the majority in the House.
You know, Congressman, Trump tried to strong-arm a debt ceiling deal into that version of the bill that failed. But Republicans, we know, they've basically told us they're promising to slash more than $2 trillion in government spending and add a debt hike into a reconciliation package next year. But in order to do that, to cut the $2 trillion, they're not going to be able to do that without putting a torch to things like Social Security and Medicare. They're already calling to raise the retirement age for Social Security and to restructure Medicare.
That's correct. If they're going to, and apparently there was a slide that was presented during the House Republican-only meeting yesterday afternoon that showed right up on the wall what they were planning to do, at least $1.5 trillion worth of cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and a few other areas. The reality is, if it was so easy to cut trillions of dollars of government spending, it would have been done by now. You cannot make cuts that deep unless you're really going after where most of the money is, which also happen to be some of the most popular programs that the American government is in business of providing.
Congressman, I want you to take a quick look at this tongue-in-cheek video that's been done by the Leakin Project calling Trump vice president to President Elon Musk. Take a quick watch.
As vice president, Trump will finally have the time to do the things that make him happiest. Talk about old movies, playing on his phone, as President Musk and his assistant J.D. Vance select appointees and write policies. We feel certain Trump will play his part because he's a good boy. Who's a good boy? Trump's a good boy.
Congressman, it may be tongue-in-cheek, but look, Elon Musk, not Donald Trump, seem to be leading the GOP messaging on the bill this week, even with some members of Congress calling for Musk to become the Speaker of the new Congress. So, Congressman Boyle, who's the boss here?
Yeah, well, I mean, here are the facts. A bipartisan agreement had been reached among 4 parties, the leaders of House Republicans, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, and Senate Democrats. That was unveiled late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. And then Elon Musk took to his social media platform, I still call it Twitter, he took to that platform, and over the course of about 5 or 6 hours, he sent tweet after tweet after tweet and intimidated Speaker Mike Johnson and House Republicans into pulling the bill. So the reality is, it's not an exaggeration or a hyperbole to say Elon Musk is the most powerful person in the Republican Party, and this week, he was the one who called the shots, not Donald Trump. That is dangerous to American democracy.
I got less than a minute. I do have to ask, you know what we're waiting to see, right? That House Ethics Committee report into former Congressman Matt Gaetz is expected to be released at any moment. Any word on when we might be able to see that?
Well, just to be clear, I don't serve on the Ethics Committee, and I don't have any privileged information, but I have heard, I mean, it certainly was being talked about last night, that on Monday morning, that would probably be the first point at which we could see what is in that report.
That sounds like Christmas. Congressman Brendan Boyle, happy holidays to you and your family. Thanks for joining us today. Go home. Do whatever you need to do with your family. This week, Luigi Mangione, accused of fatally shooting the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was charged with 4 federal criminal counts, including 1 for murder, which could carry the death penalty. These charges came days after the Manhattan DA's office filed 11 state charges, including first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. Despite the stark violence and gravity of the charges, the public's reaction has been mixed, with some people sympathizing with the suspect. The killing, while wrong and tragic, has sparked a complex conversation, though, about the healthcare industry and who exactly it serves. Joining me now is Dr. Sachin Jain, the CEO of SCAN Group and SCAN Health Plan, a California-headquartered Medicare Advantage plan with more than 300,000 members. Dr. Jain, thank you so much for joining the show. I want to let our viewers know you have a very unique point of view here. You're a practicing physician. You were a senior advisor to the administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And now you're the CEO of a not-for-profit health plan. According to the feds, Mangione had a notebook on him when he was arrested. Inside it, he wrote, quote, "The target is insurance." Federal prosecutors allege that Mangione did this in an attempt to spark a debate over insurance industry practices. Do you think insurers are now listening?
I think everyone's listening. I think we're in a moment of reckoning right now, Katie, where there's a greater realization that people are unhappy, they're frustrated, they're angry with the state of U.S. healthcare. And I think all of us who work in healthcare are starting to begin to look inward and ask the question of why, and more importantly, how do we move forward with solutions? This has been a very challenging time for everyone who works in healthcare, and it's not just in insurance. I think people who work in the health system world and the pharmaceutical industry are beginning to take a look at what it is that they're doing and how it's impacting people. And I think now's a big moment for change, and I'm hoping that this will be an inflection point for U.S. healthcare.
You know, Dr. Jain, you've been very vocal about your thoughts on the healthcare industry. You recently wrote a really good article in Forbes saying, quote, "Policy discourse increasingly reflects the perspective that health insurers are an obstacle, not an enabler, to a functioning healthcare system. Rather than being counted on to do the right thing, health insurers should be subject to intensive regulation to protect the public." So we've got to look to legislators, though, to fix this broken system. They can't kind of self-regulate or self-fix.
Yeah, in that article, I was reflecting on the fact that really our perception of insurers will actually shape, how we treat them in the public sphere. And I actually don't think that we should be looking to regulators. I believe it's time for companies to act and to solve the problems that, frankly, have been normalized for far too long. People experience waits and delays in their care. People are subject to high deductible health plans and don't necessarily know what their healthcare costs will be. This is wrong. And I think, those of us who work in healthcare came to work in this industry to try to help people. And, what we find ourselves in is in a Frankenstein healthcare system where we aren't necessarily doing the thing we set out to do. And so I believe the work begins today to begin to look at the practices that are causing frustration, that are causing people challenges. And we have to begin to acknowledge that we are all part of the problem. And so I don't believe that it's, the job of regulators to fix these problems. But I do think that, we're an industry that has frankly been successful without necessarily being as good as we can be for the people that we serve. And I think most people who work within healthcare would tell you that they believe that they're doing the right thing. But again, I do believe we've normalized a lot of practices that, frankly, don't serve the interests of people. And, as a healthcare consumer myself, as a physician, as a leader of a healthcare organization, I believe, the time is now to make real change.
Well, I'm glad that you bring up the timing, because obviously, as you've heard on my show so far, and as we obviously know, we're going into another administration starting in January under Donald Trump. You also wrote a great piece for Forbes with your predictions for 2025, including this, what I thought, startling statement, quote, "The health equity field as we know it will end," citing Vivek Ramaswamy's post on X/Twitter, whatever you call it, saying in part, the latest HHS budget request mentions equity 829 times. Time to doge it. I mean, Dr. Jane, the Biden administration's healthcare initiatives focused on health equity, as you've noted. Isn't this what this whole public outcry is about that's come from this Luigi Mangione murder case? Isn't the idea of equity, affordability, and the understanding and the empathy that should be in one of the most important spaces, which is health and health care? I mean, isn't that what this is all about? And so, should there be any optimism going into 2025 about what this industry space is going to look like?
Look, I think that there's been a major focus on health equity over the last 4 years. And I think, companies like mine are going to continue that focus because it's the right thing to do. But at the same time, I don't know that, to your point from our previous exchange, I'm not sure we're necessarily going to be able to look to the federal government to set the table around a health equity agenda. I think it's going to need to come from health system leaders and health plan leaders in the private sector who continue to believe that these are really important topics. And that's, where we're going to, maintain focus over the next several years.
Dr. Sachin, I was going to say goodbye, but I actually wanted to bring up very quickly a graphic, and I wanted to have our director bring it up. It shows in 2023 that United Healthcare was the leader. And you can see it on your screen, hopefully. The claim denial rates by health insurance companies, 2023, they're major ones. United Healthcare is the one bar on top. It's the highest one. It's the highest denial rate. I want to be very clear. That is not justification in any capacity, Dr. Jane, for the crime that was committed by Luigi Mangione. But it's something like that, I think, that's spurring the reason why you're writing what you're writing and why you're speaking out the way that you are, so that people can have a better understanding that this blame game has to stop.
Look, every health insurance company has some form of prior authorization. Our perspective is that medical groups themselves should actually own responsibility for making decisions about people's care. Doctors, should be in the driver's seat. And I think there's some payment models that will get health insurance companies out of the business of approving and denying care and put more and more responsibility in the hands of physicians and the medical groups that they're a part of. And that's the direction that we need to move in. I don't think health insurance companies should be gatekeepers. I think we should be enablers. I think we should be advocates. And I think that's the future of this industry.
And joining me right now, we have Democratic Congresswoman from Pennsylvania, our friend Madeleine Dean, sitting in her kitchen as usual, I believe, where it's much quieter than it was for poor Allie.
I got home.
No, that's fine. Even if a dog barks, it's fine. So we have the bipartisan agreement on a government funding bill, which was torpedoed after a series of disparaging posts from billionaire Elon Musk on his own social media platform. Luckily, a government shutdown was averted just in time. But how do you explain to Americans what happened here?
Well, what I explained to Americans is that Democrats stood strong, united, for the purpose of what is in the best interest of Americans, of working people, of people who just want to do better for their families, for their farms, for their futures. What we saw, the theatrics that we saw this week, were really cynical and corrosive. Could you imagine? This was a deal that was negotiated, all four sides, Republicans and Democrats. Neither side got everything that it wanted, that we wanted, that they wanted. Mm-hmm. It was a negotiated deal in good faith, blown up, literally blown up overnight by Elon Musk, and then following him, the president-elect. So Elon Musk is not elected to anything. He's just reaping the benefits of this election cycle. His net wealth has doubled since Election Day, from $250 billion to almost 700 billion dollars. So what I would say to the American people is it's very sad. This is not the way it's supposed to work. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. It is our responsibility. And yet the Speaker of the House and the majority, Republicans are in control here. They write the bills, they put the bills on the floor, were unable over the course of the last 6 months to pass the 12 appropriations bills that would fund our government. And we were stuck in this crisis of their own making. The Speaker, Musk, and Trump created a crisis. We averted it. Democrats averted it for the American people.
I want to pick up on something that you said there. You talked about Elon Musk putting out voluminous tweets, right? He was talking about things. And then Donald Trump followed up. What do you know about the dynamic there? Elon Musk leading, Trump following. Are you hearing anything about that?
Let me be very clear. I'm not friends with Elon or the president-elect.
Not suggesting, but you have colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Are you hearing from them?
We know that it will certainly is or will be under President-elect Trump's skin that Musk got out ahead of him and blew this thing up, and then the president-elect threw in the debt ceiling. I want to be clear about the debt ceiling. And to answer your question, this friendship, I don't think is long for this world. Mr. Trump likes to be in the spotlight. He doesn't want somebody else to be in the greater spotlight. But let's talk about that throwing in of a 2-year extension of or just elimination of a debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is about paying for the bills that we have already incurred. This was a perversion, yet again, a perversion by Mr. Trump, an attempt to say, give me carte blanche to offer huge tax cuts, continuing tax cuts to the wealthy, like Mr. Musk, so that I don't have to worry about the debt and deficit. Irresponsible. Democrats wouldn't stand for it. We're not going to just give out tax cuts at the cost of our financial fidelity. The Republican Party constantly talks about being the party that cares about debt and deficits. And yet it is Mr. Trump who blew up the deficit last time around with $2.3 trillion worth of tax cuts to the wealthiest. And he wants to do it again. Again, I hope that people take away, we made a mistake in this election by electing Mr. Trump. And thank God we have Democrats who will prepare and serve as whatever guardrails we can possibly be.
Well, Speaker Johnson says that Trump had his back on the continuing resolution. He has been noticeably silent about the vote after 170 House Republicans supported that bill, even though it stripped out the provision suspending the debt limit that Trump demanded. Does that signal anything to you about Trump's political capital? Do you think it's waning a bit?
I don't know, but I do think it's interesting. You saw on the first bill that was put on the floor after the failure to put forward the agreed upon language, 38 Republicans said no. And then in the bill that we did pass late last evening, 34 Republicans said no, to a unanimous Democratic caucus who said, no, we must fund the government. It does not work for the American people when the government gets shut down. What I think is that is telling. It's telling of something. There is a break from Mr. Trump that is brewing in the Republican majority. And remember, when we come back, the majority is going to be 2 seats, 2 votes. And so I think Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk are in for an interesting ride. Sadly, the American people are too. We should never have been in this position. You don't turn your term paper in one day before Christmas. This is funding the United States government. This is paying federal workers. It's irresponsible and extraordinarily reckless.
Can I ask you quickly about the speaker vote 2 weeks away? How do you think it goes down? Does he stay as speaker, Mike Johnson?
I don't know. I know he's going to be gravely challenged, in part because of the very slim majority that his party holds. But the other reason is take a look at these last 2 years of the 118th Congress. They have failed to govern. Effectively, you've seen it time after time, Democrats have governed to avert a shutdown, to make sure that the American people can move forward, to be sure that supplemental bills for disaster, imagine that, hurricane disasters, make sure we fund those things. For the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the things that we do as Democrats matter. And you'll see a very unified set of votes around Hakeem Jeffries. I have to tell you, his leadership has been extraordinary, along with Catherine Clark and Pete Aguilar and Ted Lieu. But the Speaker faces a huge challenge. He already knows he has several votes against him. I don't know how he succeeds and becomes Speaker, especially after the bungling of this week.
I guess we'll find out January 3rd. Congressman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much. Good to see you. Joining me now is Alexi McCammon, MSNBC political analyst and host of the podcast In Sync with Alexi, and Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair and MSNBC contributor. Good to see you both. So, Alexi, you first. We may have narrowly avoided the shutdown, but how big of a problem is this still for congressional Republicans and for Trump? I mean, does it show anything about limits of Trump's power and maybe what the next couple of years of total GOP control will look like?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, I think that we all remember the constant chaos of the first Trump presidency and how congressional Republicans will run in circles to try to get whatever he wants done. Though, as you just alluded to, a number of Republicans defied him yesterday in not going along with the plan that he wanted to eliminate the debt ceiling, which is, of course, something he wants them to do so that he doesn't look like he has a bad legacy or a stain on his presidential legacy if he has to deal with it when he's president. But as long as Elon Musk continues to sort of operate as a shadow president, someone who is not elected, someone who has no governing experience, no experience writing or trying to pass legislation, they are going to run into walls and problems like this, because it's hard to tell what President-elect Trump wants half the time. It's even harder to figure out how to make those things happen when you're also taking into account someone like Elon Musk, who is now using his platform X to sort of whip the vote. He is using X users as sort of his barometer for what will pass and what should be included in bills, when that is not the way the government works, or at least it's not how it has worked historically.
Well, interestingly, Molly, Politico called this a wake-up call for Trump on the limits of his power, saying some Republicans are concerned that he won't be able to get as much done as he hoped because he's focused on the wrong thing, like the debt ceiling. Trump and the GOP are going to have a big challenge in the next few months, confirming his nominees, trying to implement his policy priorities, and then now another budget deadline in March. How treacherous could this first 100 days be?
Well, I think one of the big problems Trump has is that he ran for president on this idea that inflation was a real problem. People were really mad about inflation, and that he was going to make things cheaper, right? Because there's a real problem. People were really mad that they went to the grocery store and things were, you know, significantly more expensive. So now Trump has got to make things cheaper. But I'm not convinced that he has a real plan for making things cheaper, except tariffs, which would ultimately be inflationary. So he's
also walking the whole thing back. You heard him say, oh, you know, right, once the numbers go up, it's hard to bring them down. And then someone asked him, if you don't do that, if you don't make good on your campaign promise, will you think that you've had a failed element of your presidency? He goes, no, I don't think so.
Right. And there are a lot of other things like that he's promised, like mass deportation. And remember, yes, he did win, and he won the popular vote, which for a Republican president is not necessarily, what always happens. But here's the thing. Some of these things are not, easy to pass, normal things. Mass deportation, wildly expensive, morally reprehensible, and going to cause you big problems, and also wildly inflationary. So I do think he's got a real problem there.
Okay. Alexi, what lessons can Democrats take from this time or this around and any leverage that they might have? House Republicans are going to have an even smaller of a majority than they've had this term. We got 34 Republicans who voted no on this CR. If Democrats had left them to their own devices, it wouldn't have passed. Can that provide some protection against the more extreme policies Republicans might want to pass?
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen Congressman Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, talking about how he feels that the Democratic caucus has stood up to Trump and congressional Republicans already. I think what's really fascinating is that Speaker Mike Johnson is giving away the secret by telling NBC and others that he basically asked Elon Musk if he wanted to take his job. Right. I mean, the man is already signaling that he's not loving having the seat that he's in, and that he's even having multiple headaches from his colleagues. And so I think that Democrats are watching this, and they're seeing not only do they have leverage from the policy side, but the personnel side as well, because as congenial as he might be, we saw how Kevin McCarthy before him was pushed out. And we know that come January 3rd, Republicans will be having yet another fight in which they could very well try to replace Johnson. And so I would expect Jeffries and others to try to use that as leverage, too.
So, Molly, Representative Jerry Connolly, who was just elected to the top minority spot on the powerful House Oversight Committee, spoke to MSNBC yesterday about Elon Musk's role in killing the original budget deal. Here's that.
This is unprecedented. It's dangerous. He is riddled with conflicts of interest. He's kind of the original American oligarch, a big word, but it means a rich guy who's unaccountable, who was elected to nothing, who is basically overshadowing the actual president-elect of the United States, Donald Trump. I think that's a really troubling development for everybody. It's not funny. It's actually quite serious.
So when it comes to why Musk got involved, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro sent a letter to congressional leaders Friday noting the original bill included restrictions on tech investments in China and accused Musk of derailing the deal to, quote, protect his wallet and the Chinese Communist Party at the expense of American workers, innovators, and businesses. How often, Molly, can we expect him to upend critical government operations for personal gain?
Well, this is the reason that we have all of these ethics laws that are, Trump world pretty much thumbed their nose at the last time, though some of them were still, people still were able to abide by some of them. But yes, sure. And that's why we don't have people in the federal government who also work in business, right? And that's probably why we shouldn't have members of Congress allowed to trade stocks, right? Because we should have people who serve in the federal government who are working for the people, the taxpayers, and not for themselves. But certainly it's a conflict. And certainly even if it's not, even if he's not acting that way to get something, it creates the appearance of a conflict, which is ultimately just as problematic. And I think that, look, the whole idea of having an unelected billionaire run the government when he did not run for president is riddled with problems, moral implications, and ultimately, I think I don't know how long this relationship can last. But I also think, he has such a sort of very limited understanding of American government. I mean, he was bragging that this bill was weighed less than it did before. I mean, that's not a metric in which we judge legislation.
Well, among the things that got cut, Alexi, again, by the resolution pushed by Trump and Musk, and it failed, it cut funding for a bipartisan childhood cancer research program. That cost $190 million. That's a relatively small amount compared to the overall budget. Is this the kind of government efficiency we're going to see Musk and his DOGE department try to implement?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You remember Elon Musk saying not that long ago, oh, Americans are going to have to get used to living within their means. It makes me feel so angry, even recalling him saying that, because it is such a joke. But not only that, you were just talking about their business conflicts. There was another measure in there that Senator Ted Cruz has been pushing that would force tech companies to remove so-called revenge porn, which are, explicit images that were shared privately and consensually, and then someone decides to share them without that person's consent all over the internet. It ruins people's lives. It is devastating. And guess what? That was taken out too. And there's a lot of revenge porn that is prolific on sites like X and Truth Social. And so you have to ask yourself, what do these people care about? Is it literally just, as Molly was saying, the so-called weight of these things and the numbers and the bottom line? Or do they have values and morals that are backing up what they're pushing for and what they're pushing against?
Speaking of values, at least the Senate brought back that childhood cancer research, and that did get into the final bill. So thankfully, we can report that. Alexi and Molly, always love to have you on. I'll see you again soon. Thank you.